So some behaviors are best when they're the same every single time, like following a recipe. If you know how to make a great apple pie, you want to make that great apple pie every single time and you want to make it the same way. But some behaviors are best when they're not the same every single time, like telling a joke. Because if your friend tells you that "Aren't you glad I didn't say banana knock knock" joke one more time, you're probably going to lose it. So how do we train variability in a behavior when we want variability in behavior? So if you're wondering how to inject a little bit of variability into your own behaviors, then this is the video for you. Or you're in the right place. Or stick around. This one's made just for you. Or this video is exactly the one you've been looking for. Or sound familiar? Then you'll love what's coming next. Or if that's you, you don't want to miss this, because I am Dr. Igor Yurichevich and this is Behavior Modification. Let's go. All right, so today we're going to take a look at a very special case of intermittent reinforcement called a lag schedule that is used to increase response variability in certain behaviors. So again, in some behaviors, you want to do them the same every single time. But in other behaviors that we do, very important behaviors that we do, you want to mix it up. You want variability in that behavior. So how can we train variability in these types of behavior? So the working definition that we're going to go with today actually comes from a fiction author, Rita Mae Brown, and her book, Sudden Death. And the quote, which you probably are familiar with, but is oftentimes misattributed to other people, has to do with response variability and its importance in some of our behaviors. And the quote is that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting different results. So this is what we're going to be using as our definition for why we want to inject a little bit of variability into some behaviors, because you don't want to do the same thing over and over again, especially if you require different results. So when do we want to avoid doing the same thing over and over again? When do we need those different results? Well, there are a few categories of behavior where we definitely want some variability. So for example, problem solving. Problem solving is a behavior where it is often, in fact, it's almost always not the best strategy to just keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. If plan A fails, plan B should not just be plan A again. Every single one of those crumpled up pieces of paper was an attempt at the behavior. And you're moving closer to solving the problem if every one of those crumpled up pieces of behavior had a different approach to it, had a different behavior to it. So the trial and error approach in problem solving reflects that response variability. You want to do a trial, you want to find those errors, and then you don't want to do the same trial again. You want to try something different, and that increases your chances of finding an effective strategy. So problem solving is one example where we want that variability in behavior. Another example is language development, right? So children learning to communicate need to learn to communicate in a variety of different ways. So a child learning to communicate that they want juice when they're thirsty might begin by just saying the one word phrase juice, and then they get juice. But we need to teach them how to verbalize variability in their responses. So things like start them off with juice. Well, here's your juice. But then, can I have juice? I want apple juice. More juice, please. So that kind of variability in sentence structure, vocabulary, phrasing, it's key to developing flexible language skills that are key to being able to socialize in our society. And speaking of social behavior, some social behaviors need to be variable as well, because some approaches, they work well with some people, but they don't work well with others. Some people like jokes. Other people think they're a waste of time. Some people like being asked a lot of questions. Other people might feel intimidated if you ask them a lot of questions. You need to be able to be socially flexible. That is, have response variability across different people, and that can help you build and maintain relationships across a very diverse set of social contexts. And then one final example, adaptive academic performance. So if you're a college student and you're studying for finals, you might discover that highlighting just isn't enough. Highlighting the material, which is actually a very ineffective study strategy, but maybe you just find that for this particular course, highlighting the material isn't enough. It would be horrible if you had no response variability in your studying and you just kept highlighting the passages, hoping that eventually it'll work. What would be better is if you injected a little response variability and started testing yourself with flashcards, you joined a study group, you tried teaching the material to a friend. That variability in your study methods might help you increase your understanding and adapt successfully to these new academic demands. So how can we actually train this variability as a behavior in itself? How can we actually increase response variability? Well, one way to do that is to use schedules of reinforcement that are known as lag schedules of reinforcement. So what is a lag schedule of reinforcement? Well, a lag schedule of reinforcement is where reinforcement is delivered only if the current response is different from a specific number of previous responses. So one of the classic examples of something that is reinforced on a lag schedule of reinforcement would be something like saying the alphabet. So if you're going to get reinforced for saying the alphabet and you say A, your very next behavior better not be repeating A. In this case, you got to move to B. And after you've done B, you got to move to C. And after you're done C, you got to move to D. And once you've done D, you can't go back to A. You got to keep going through the alphabet. Each response has to be different from the previous responses in order for you to get reinforced. Now that one has the added constraint of requiring that the responses be done in a specific order, but you get the idea that the next response has to differ from the previous response in order for you to get reinforced. Other examples, you can have a lag 1 schedule of reinforcement. That is where the response has to differ from the one immediately before. And a great example of this is walking. So when you walk, you put your left foot forward, then you put your right foot forward, then you put your left, then you put your right. Whatever foot goes forward has to be different from the one that went forward previously. So if you go left, right, left, then you're walking. If you go left, 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 then you're hopping. So walking gets reinforced on a lag 1 schedule where the current response is reinforced. That is, you walk forward and you don't tumble, only if it was different than the previous response, going left, right, left, right. On a lag 2 schedule of reinforcement, the response must differ from the previous 2 responses. On a lag 3, it's got to differ from the previous 3 responses and so forth. And you can go all the way up to a lag infinity schedule where your current response has to differ from all previous responses. So for example, if you're a teacher and you're teaching children the alphabet and you're asking them to name every animal that they can think of that begins with the letter A, that's a lag infinity schedule of reinforcement. Because if the first child says alligator, the next child says aardvark, the next child cannot say alligator or aardvark. They have to come up with a new animal, anaconda, for example. And then that has to keep going. None of these children can repeat responses that came previously because, again, this is a lag infinity schedule of reinforcement. So lag schedules can be used to increase variability in a lot of different types of behaviors. One of its most important applications is increasing variability in verbal behavior. So for this, let's take a look at a lag schedule that was used to train variability in verbal behavior. So we're going to take a look at Helt and Schlinger's work on increasing variability of tacting under a lag 3 schedule of reinforcement. So tacting is where you simply label a object with a term. So if you ask them, in an image, what do you see? And they say, I see a ball, I see a dog. That is tacting. So in this case, they used a lag 3 schedule with a 13-year-old boy who had autism and Fragile X syndrome and a 4-year-old with mild intellectual disability. And the participants were shown an image and they were asked, what do you see in that image? And reinforcement only occurred if the 4th response differed from the previous 3. So that 4th response had to be different than the previous 3. That is a lag 3 schedule of reinforcement. So let's take a look at what happened to these individuals. So we have Neota and we have Link. And I hope he does not go alone and takes this because it's dangerous out there. But anyways, we got Neota and we got Link. And they were being, again, placed on this lag schedule 3 of reinforcement. So let's take a look at their baseline performance first. So we can see here that in their baseline performance, there was very little variation in their responses. So if they were shown a picture and asked, hey, what do you see? They might say ball. And it's like, well, what else do you see? Ball. Well, what do you see? Ball. And they would always say ball, and they wouldn't vary their responses at all. That was during the baseline period. However, during the intervention period, when the lag 3 schedule was in place, they would only get reinforced for a response that was different from the previous 3 responses, that lag 3 schedule. So in order to get reinforced, they couldn't just say ball, 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 ball. They would have to say ball, dog, house, and then on that 4th one, if it differed from those previous 3, like, oh, I see a tree, then they would get reinforced. And what happened was that their tacting variability, their naming variability increased. So here we can see for Neota, naming ability went up to about 8, 9 different responses. For Link, naming variability went up to about 5 or 6 different responses. So very effective lag 3 schedule of reinforcement for increasing the variability in this important verbal ability. And then also very encouragingly, during a follow-up period, that tacting variability was maintained. So we can see here that it was maintained both for Link and for Neota, indicating that these were long-standing changes that occurred due to learning, and all that they did was place them on a lag 3 schedule where they only got reinforced if their response was different from their previous 3 responses. So those are lag schedules of reinforcement. So just kind of give you a quick summary of what we went over today. Lag schedules, they're useful for promoting that variability, useful for promoting flexible thinking and problem solving, useful for promoting variability in language, both in typically developing individuals and, as we saw in the study, for individuals with deficits and impairments. Reinforcement should be contingent on novelty in these situations. So if you are doing a lag schedule, it's important to remember that reinforcement should be consistent on novelty and not just correctness. So in that previous example with Neota and Link, if they named an object that was not in the picture, we should still count that as a novel response, even if it's not correct. And then later on, you can change the reinforcement contingency so that only correct ones are reinforced. But especially in the beginning of a lag schedule, reinforcement is contingent on novelty, new responses, rather than correct responses. And then also these lag schedules can be adjusted to increase the difficulty gradually. So much like we saw with thinning schedules of intermittent reinforcement, you can thin a lag schedule of intermittent reinforcement as well. So you can go from a lag 1 to a lag 2 to a lag 3 to a lag 4, etc. And also, much like we saw in thinning reinforcement, you don't want to increase that too quickly and then end up with ratio strain and end up with all the problems that we saw occur with ratio strain. And then that follow-up support, again, is important to maintain variability over time. So we do want to keep these lag schedules of reinforcement in place in order to maintain that variability as the person grows and develops. All right, so that was it for what I wanted to cover today. So kind of some key takeaways. First off, response variability is something that can be trained. It's a learnable, reinforceable behavior. And it's important to train this because response variability matters in problem solving. It matters in language development. It matters in academic performance. It matters in so many very meaningful types of behavior. Lag schedules can be used to increase this variability by encouraging novelty and discouraging repetition. So basically, you reinforce the novelty. You put repetition on an extinction schedule. Very effective for language, problem solving, social communication behaviors, and it's useful in both clinical settings and real world settings. So we saw its application to verbal behavior in the Health and Schlesinger study, and we can see how just applying the schedule can actually increase the variability in that very important verbal behavior of tacting. So that's it for what I wanted to cover today. So next time we're going to take a sharp turn, and it's going to be an important turn, and talk about a concept that is often misunderstood outside of psychology, and that is negative reinforcement. So if you've ever wondered why you hit the snooze button when you try to get up in the morning, then you can come back here and find out why next time. But for now, stay frosty, stay functional, and go modify some behavior. Yeah, I'm recording this too, so now you're going to be a part of my video. I might put you in the blooper reel. All right, thank you.